Alright guys, so this is the lecture for Module 29. I hope you're having a good day so far. So in this lecture we're going to learn about a new graph called the Loanable Funds graph, or market for loanable funds. Basically, we're going to take a look and see how people borrow money and where that money comes from and how those two sources kind of intersect there. The picture here is a picture of Cowboys Stadium. Which, if you didn't know, was paid for with borrowed money by the city of Arlington, and so that kind of is the reason for it. It cost lots of money to build that stadium. It was over $1 billion, so it was very expensive for the city, and they had to borrow money to pay for it. And we're also going to take a look and see how those things interact with each other. So the market for loanable funds is a hypothetical market that examines the market outcome of the demand for funds generated by borrowers and the supply of funds provided by lenders. Basically, in English, what that means is we're looking at people borrowing money and banks supplying that money to people. All right, the interest rate is the price calculated percentage of the amount borrowed charged by the lender to a borrower for the use of their savings for 1 year. So basically, it's the fee for borrowing money, right? Now, the rate of return is a concept that you need to know. All right, businesses will not borrow money unless they will make more than it will cost them to borrow. All right, so they're going to really study the impact of. They're basically going to study how much it's going to cost them to borrow the money and how much their potential profits will be at a later date. So it's important for businesses to be able to analyze that. All right, now you're not going to draw this. I'm just going to draw it first for you here. So the demand for loanable funds is going to look very similar, all right, to any other demand curve we've drawn. Now in the market for loanable funds, you'll notice I put an R right here, which is different than the money market graph. The real interest rate is what's going to go on the y-axis for the market for loanable funds. And down here, we're going to have the quantity of loanable funds on the x-axis. All right. So the demand is going to be downward sloping. All right, just like all of the demand curves, because as the interest rates drop, there's going to be an increase in the quantity of funds demanded. All right, so once again, you do not have to draw this. I just want to go ahead and draw that for you. Right there. Now the supply of loanable funds is going to be just like every other supply curve we've ever drawn. Right there. Alright. So the reason why the supply of loanable funds increases is because as interest rates go up, right, there's going to be more money available to lend out to people. Alright, and so you have to think back to where banks get money to loan out to people when we were talking about T-charts, T accounts. Basically, banks will get money to loan out to people primarily from us saving money in banks. Basically, anyone putting money into a bank gives the bank more money to then loan out to people. All right. Now, in equilibrium, this is what I want you to draw on the graph in your notes. All right, we're going to put the two on the same graph. All right. Now, basically what we have here is at a given supply and demand for loanable funds, that'll be the current interest rate, and that's going to be the quantity of loans made or quantity of money borrowed. All right. Now, there are things that can shift the demand for loanable funds. So the two main things, though, that you have to think about is going to be changes in perceived business opportunities. So if businesses think they can make more money by borrowing money, they're going to borrow more. If they think the economy is not going to be doing well, or their businesses are going to be doing well, they're going to borrow less money. All right. The other thing to think about in this study is changes in government borrowing. All right. So the government borrows money, and so they can impact the market for loanable funds in a huge way. So if the government increases their debt borrowing, then that's going to increase the demand for loanable funds. All right, the opposite is also true. If they decrease their borrowing, that will shift it to the left. And if the government actually, heaven forbid, runs a surplus, then that actually will get to the point where they are saving money. So that's going to increase the supply of loanable funds. So those are the choices there. Now, there is a concept called crowding out, which occurs when a government deficit drives up the interest rate and leads to reduced investment spending and consumption. So let me draw that for you here on this page. You do not have to draw this in your notes unless you really want to. All right, but you do need to know what this is and what this looks like. All right, so let's say that we are in equilibrium here. All right, let's say that the current interest rate is, I'm just going to make up a number here, 4% for borrowing money. And at that interest rate, there's going to be $4 trillion worth of money borrowed. Wow, I can't believe I messed this up. That should say demand for loan funds. There we go. All right, so let's say that the government decides that they are going to borrow $1 trillion to pay for I don't know, let's say a high-speed rail network going all across the United States, and that's how much it's going to cost. So they're going to borrow that money to pay for it. Well, that's going to increase the demand for loanable funds significantly. I don't know why I keep messing that up. Demand for loanable funds there. And so now, rather than $4 trillion being borrowed, there's not going to be $5 trillion because the government's put an additional $1 trillion worth of borrowed money, and that is going to cause the interest rate to increase to, let's say, 6% out in the open market. Well, by doing that, what they've done is they've crowded out all businesses that would have borrowed at 4%, 5%, 4.5%, 5.5%, to basically not being able to borrow anymore. They've prevented private businesses from participating in the economy because of a higher interest rate. So that's the fear with government borrowing, is that too much of it can lead to this crowding out effect in the economy. All right. Now, these are the factors that will shift the supply of loanable funds. So the first one is changes in private savings behavior. We've talked about how if people save more money, then that will lead to an increase in money that banks have to loan out to people. So if people save more, that's going to increase the supply. If they save less, that is going to decrease the supply of loanable funds. The other thing that will affect the supply of loanable funds is changes in capital inflows. Now, what a capital inflow is, it's where money comes into the United States from another country into a bank here in the United States. So if foreigners are putting money in banks here in the United States, then that's going to increase the supply of loanable funds available in our lending system. All right, so now for the first time we're starting to talk about international trade and how that kind of flow can impact the American economy. All right, so an increase in the supply of loanable funds. So let's say that there's a bunch of investors in China who want to invest in companies here in the United States. All right, and let's go back to our experience here. So let's say that this R1 equals a 4% interest rate, and that at 4%, that $4 trillion gets loaned out. Well, let's say that Chinese investors have an extra $1 trillion to spare. So they move that to the United States to invest in American companies here, and they put it in the banks over here. And now we have $5 trillion available to be lent out. But because of the increase in supply, now interest rates are going to be much lower at 3%, because banks have more money to lend out. So you see how that works there. Now it could work the opposite. People in America can move their money outside of the United States, and that would decrease the supply of loanable funds. People here could either save more or save less. You really have to analyze the situation and see what happens. All right. Now, inflation and interest rates. Basically, historically, major changes in interest rates have been driven by many factors, including government policy, technological innovations that create new investment opportunities. However, the most important factor affecting interest rates is changes in expectations about future inflation. So, remember when we talked about who gains from unexpected inflation? Well, that's where this comes into play, because the banks are always going to try to make their money. So if they think inflation is going to be high, they're going to raise interest rates because they need to cover themselves in case of inflation. All right, so the real interest rate, guys, is, if you remember, is equal to the nominal interest rate minus the inflation rate. However, in the real world, neither borrowers nor lenders know what the future inflation rate will be when they make a deal. Therefore, actual loan contracts specify a nominal interest rate rather than a real interest rate. All right. This is known as the Fisher effect. All right, where an increase in the expected future inflation drives up the nominal interest rate, leaving the expected real interest rate unchanged. Okay, so we are going to stop there with that. If you have any questions, make sure you write that down on the back. Hope you enjoyed the lecture, and I will see you in the next class.